Which brings us to the part you guys are all waiting for, today's session. Our thought leaders are Kevin Wilde, who will be talking about winning at the Shark Tank, how L&D leaders really gain support, gain management support, and Gale Halsey, the talent behind an award-winning team. The way we're going to structure this is each of the presenters will speak for about 20 minutes. Then we'll do a short little breakout. People will share some lessons learned. We'll go on to the next speaker, and then we will finish with some rotating questions at the end of the session. So I hope everyone will stay on for everything. I think the questions can be very interesting. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Kevin Wilde to get us started.
Great, thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to be part of our session today. Got our screen share going here, which is great. And looking forward to the interaction on this session, but also Gale's part. So it was fun being a co-author in the book. I'll plug this book more than a few times. There we go. So I'm chapter 5. And the notion is, how do you really take the great L&D stuff that we all have and get buy-in for it? And so with that, I want to present a few ideas, pull out a few things from the chapter, but importantly, give you a number of tactics, things that I uncovered in writing the chapter. And I want to encourage you to think about how to fine tune your own influence in leadership as you move forward. Okay, so imagine it's the start of the year. It's 2022, and you're walking in the room to sell your next great L&D idea. You need support, you need budget, you need time. And you're going in front of either could be a senior leadership team, could be your big stakeholders, and you're thinking, finally, I have a seat at the table. Well, I'm here to tell you, based on my 34-year corporate career at GE and General Mills, selling L&D programs, it doesn't really feel like a seat at the table. What it feels like is walking into the TV show Shark Tank, and what you don't want is you don't want this.
I'm out.
I'm out.
I'm out.
So I've heard I'm out more times than I want to in my career, and I'd like to help you avoid that moving forward. And here's one thing that I've got early in the chapter here, that this notion about how do you get I'm in, that gaining support, it really isn't some secrets, but we're finding it's more and more about, do we do things that we commonly know and talk about? Do we practice them well? And do we do them consistently? So part of my message today is how to remind yourself to do the right things, to gain support for your next great L&D idea, and also to up your skill level. And the trap I found over time that I encourage you to watch out for is we get too excited about our new L&D idea and we forget what we know about strategic influence. And we cut corners and we assume people will just see our brilliance. You know, hey, I went to this Fredrickson webinar, got this great idea, so here it is. That's half of it. The other half of it is strategic selling. And you know, if we don't do it well, we hear the shark say, I'm out. Or they say, I'm in until I get busy. Or we're in until we need to cut some budgets. And then we're out. You don't want to hear that. I've heard that in my career. So I want to share with you the approach I take. And as I mentioned, what I did in writing the chapter is I reached out to a lot of the chief learning officers and senior talent leader award-winning people I knew. And I said, hey, how do you do this? How do you really get heartfelt management support for your programs? Obviously, they've won a lot of awards, a lot of industry recognitions. And I learned a lot. It really felt like a master's class on how great L&D leaders sell influence. And I want to share a few things from the book chapter on that, give you a few ideas. And I mentioned we all have a little mental checklist of how am I going to sell this? And I encourage you to take a few notes on how you can up your game to sell more consistently, to get the sharks to say, I'm in and I love this. Okay, with that, one person I talked to was Carrie Williard. She is currently the Chief Learning Officer of Visa. I mean, just an industry pro. had worked in other companies. At Sun Microsystems, she was actually in a P&L role. She's written a number of books. And this was what she said. She said that what you need to do is, before the idea, you need to be proactively building those relationships. And she told me this fascinating story of how she entered Visa. Now, Carrie is a pro. She's an expert. And there's no reason that she couldn't walk into the CEO's office the first week at Visa and say, hey, here's what we need to do. Here is my L&D strategy. She didn't do that. She literally took 6 months to build relationships and had coffee with 150 leaders. Now, she was doing the normal L&D stuff during the 6 months, so it wasn't just all coffee chats with Carrie, but she also had focus groups with over 750 employees. 6 months later, a strategy started emerging, but it wasn't Carrie's. It was the collective wisdom of those relationships she had built. Another person that I talked to was Kimo Kippen. You might know him. He's used to be the CLO for Hilton. And one thing he talked about is early on in his Hilton senior leadership career, he started to make very intentional friends with certain parts of the organization, including the project management office. So he was building those relationships, if you will, doing the Carrie Willard, I'm buying you coffee, what's going on in your shop, what's going on. So he would understand the next business initiative, what's coming down the road, and that his L&D could be seen as a solution to some of the challenges of those new business initiatives. He also made friends with IT. I did that in my career, given how important technology is. And it isn't making friends so that they support your stuff. It's building relationships. You understand their world, and they get to know you as a credible business partner for their problems and challenges. That's proactive. Couple tips I wanted to pass on this principle. Number one, I encourage you to look at your calendar for the past 30 days and just count how many hours you spent with your critical stakeholders. Most of us spend time with each other. And that's great, that's positive, that's whatnot, but it's not getting the job done to proactively build relationships across the enterprise. So just try, one tactic is look at your last 30 days, see what you like about it, and then how to make time to do this proactive relationship building. Identify 3 to 5 what I call sharks, your critical stakeholders that you need to do more relationship building. And again, not to sell your stuff, but to understand their world more. Finally, as with Kimo Kippen, the technique about how do you get upstream on what's coming next. My time at General Mills, one thing I did is I spent time with the business development team that created the strategy for the organization and work with senior leaders to support them in some of their efforts, but also to, again, to understand how the business is working, what are the pressures, what's coming next. So 3 ideas on how do you spend more calendar time to proactively build relationships, show the sharks know you before you walk in the room. I do want to give you one worksheet. By the way, we're going to have a link if you'd like to get them. By the way, they're also in the book. But the worksheet I want to mention is the strategic business partner planning worksheet. Looks something like this. You can just take a piece of paper. What are the 6 relationships I need to build more of? What's the role title? What's the function? What's my current quality with them? How supportive are they? How much do I understand their world? And then how do I strengthen the relationship? And then plan the next 90 days. We're going to get into a breakout when my little session's over with. And one thing you might want to talk about is how do you do that? How do you start proactively building relationships? So that's principle number 1. I heard from my panel. Here's number 2. This is actually one more time, the editor of the book, Tamar Echolese, CLO of the Year, was the CLO at Qualcomm. And when I interviewed her, one thing she did, she shouted into the phone. She said, "Don't be a learning waitress." I said, "What do you mean, don't be a learning waitress?" And she said, "We are such a service business that our tendency is to take in all orders. So we run around the department, we run around the organization, trying to be relevant and taking in whatever people want. And all we're doing is order taking." And I have to admit, there are times in my career that it was very satisfying to tell a business leader, "Sure, I'll do that for you. Sure, I'll do that for you. Yes, we'll keep this legacy program going." And it didn't get to the strategic work we needed to do. So one thing Tamar talked about is when she came into the senior role at Qualcomm, she had everyone in her department go through performance consulting training and took that mindset about we are going to be performance consultants first, not L&D people. And she re-engineered the processes to fit that. And over time built a very powerful, again, proactively built relationships, but a reputation that they weren't order takers. They were there to do the strategic work. One of the things that I have fun with right now at this point in my career is I get invited to judge awards. And I remember reading an application once of a very large technology company where the CLO decided that, look, these are the 5 business initiatives for the year. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 comes from our CEO. We are only going to fund and do training for those 5 initiatives. Everything else is canceled. Now, that was brave to do that because a lot of times there's a lot of order takers, stakeholders that love their stuff, legacy stuff. But that was a very courageous move to say, no, we are going to make a serious difference in the 5 most important things to this company. And they did rather well because of that. They really could double down on their effort, their training, and everything else at best was put on hold. But more importantly, they declared we're going to be most relevant to the business by starting with the business. And a couple ideas I picked up from Tamara and others I want to pass along is don't be an L&D geek. Be seen as someone that's just always thinking about learning and development. Instead, think about a business person. The mindset is, I'm a business person who happens to be wearing an L&D hat. And that mindset about, hey, I'm an organizational person first. L&D is just the hat I wear to help accomplish what's most important. A couple ideas I want to give you. Number 1, watch the language. We get so excited about our vernacular, our terminology, and those are the words we speak in when we're pitching to the sharks. Sharks don't want to hear that. Sharks think in shark talk. So whatever your business is, think shark talk. I remember a couple years ago when human capital systems started coming up with data, and I was asked, what does our dashboard look like? What does our L&D dashboard look like? And what I said was, no, the last thing you want to do is produce an L&D dashboard and give it to a business leader. What you want to do is go look at what dashboards from other functions those sharks are looking at and make your L&D dashboard look like that. So again, their words, not yours, things they value. Now, behind the scene, little meetings like this, oh yeah, we should talk shop. But watch that language is point number 1 about, being the performance person. Secondly is have a predetermined screen when things come to you. Decide, should we do this L&D project or not? Again, one of the applications I read, just an outstanding organization. They had put together ahead of time and it was signed off by the business. Here's the criteria we are going to use when learning and development requests come to us. It was detailed, it was vetted out, but if you will, the tough love was set ahead of time. So when it came time to say yes or no, they had a rational list. And again, that's what a performance consultant does. The final thing I'll mention on this one is I just love this notion about once you set a goal, once you set an initiative, add 2 words. And at the end of your sentence, add the words so that. And so anytime we're doing a learning and development effort, could be a DE&I session, could be sales, acumen training, you name it. When you're done with here's what we're going to do, add the words so that. And what follows should be what happens in the business. What happens as a result of the training? So you're not there putting on the activities or what I used to call, we were training vacation planners, that we got our rewards because people had a good vacation. No. We get the rewards when something good happens in the business. And we should be very clear on that. One of the favorite questions I now ask when a leader says, gee, I'd like to have this learning and development training is I say, gee, later on, you're going to ask a question. So let me ask it right now. If we were to do this training really, really well, what business needle, what business metric would move? In other words, I'm asking the measurement question to my stakeholder ahead of time to say, rather than later on trying to justify, did this impact the business? Let's talk about it now. What business needle would move if we did this training really well? And that's the spirit of the so that. A couple ideas there. And again, I've got a little worksheet. We'll have this available for you as well. This is called the value add analysis. This one is worth doing on an annual basis. And let me give you a little quick view of that. Essentially what you're doing is at the top of the page, you're listing what are the key business initiatives. And again, if you've done your proactive relationship building, you're hanging with these people that are setting the business objectives of the year, program management office, key stakeholders, so you know what's most important to them. Then the middle of it is doing an audit of all your current L&D activities, what's funded, what activities are going on, and then you're giving it a rating. And these are the 4 ratings to use. The first one is called mission critical. And the notion is that piece of business cannot get done without this training. That's mission critical. The second is strong contributor. They might be able to get the business thing done, but it's not going to be done well without our training. That's mission critical. The third is standard contribution. It's good, it's important, everybody likes it. And the final one is it's a mild contribution. Having done that, think about, okay, how do we strengthen the mission critical ones? What are some new ones we should go after? And maybe we should start eliminating or pruning some of those bottom ones, or at least put it on hold. The acid test is this. Once you've done this audit yourself, give it to a business leader, give it to your governance council, and ask them, do you agree with my ratings or not? So it's not just talking to yourself. It's again, it's asking the sharks, here's how I'm seeing the importance of the work. What do you think? Good conversation to have. And again, that's a worksheet. The final point, David Vance, CLO of the Year from Caterpillar years ago. He's a trained economist. And he told me when he went into the role, the very first thing he did was set up a business governance council. Now, again, he called it the principle about share to gain. We're going to gain support. We're going to gain influence if we share the decision making that we have in our organization. And in his case, the priorities for training would go through the governance council. Now, here's what I'm not talking about. I'm not talking about the coordinating council many of us have, where we pull together our L&D leaders to coordinate programs, to agree on a learning platform. All good, all important. That's not a governance council from a business perspective. It's basically trying to get some of the sharks in the room to help you prioritize what's important. I'll give you an extreme example. I interviewed Nigel Payne. At the time, he was a chief learning officer in the UK for the BBC. He created the governance council, again, line leaders within the BBC. And he said, okay, I'm the learning leader here. They're giving me so much money. Here are all the things we could spend it on. You decide. I've got my priorities, I got my thoughts, but I want to hear from you first. So Nigel was actually turning the decision-making about what we do in learning and what we spend our money on. He was turning it over to the business council. May not want to go that far, but I love the spirit of that, which is we've got limited time, we've got limited resources, I've got one point of view of things, but I really value your opinion. So share to gain could include how do you increase the decision-making involvement of those sharks, of those critical stakeholders moving forward. And it's share to gain. You may feel like I'm losing some power, but what you're really gaining is, I think, master influence. The other thing I heard was from Kevin Oakes. Kevin is the CEO of I4CP, one of the research companies out there in human capital. And in going through influence, he said this: I don't believe organizations are not doing more leaders as teachers. He was making a very simple point of view that when we bring in faculty, again, either for our live classrooms, our virtual things, our digital learning, are we heavily using our business leaders? And the point there is if someone's involved in actually either deciding or helping teach or providing some story behind a lesson, they're more apt to say, hey, that's an important program, I'm in. Finally, a couple ideas on the share to gain. One is establish a real business L&D governance council or process. Share to gain, involve them in your decision-making. Secondly, actively recruit leaders as teachers. Now, I know everybody is crazy busy. Things are not slowing down at all. But if you can get a few people to give a little bit of time to help you with the learning, to share their stories, there's lots of ways to do that. You're going to find huge benefits. And again, it goes back to proactive relationship building. Final point I heard from some of the people I interviewed was the notion about peer-to-peer learning. And again, we've seen a major shift in learning and development from we have the knowledge we want to share with you, to, hey, all you people out there know a lot of things, but you're not sharing it easily with each other. I think the pandemic kind of loosened that up a bit in terms of peer-to-peer sharing. My question is, how do we evolve that? If you consider the last 18 months to be, if you will, the accidental pilot, we had a lot of things going on to get through our days and our weeks. What of that should we carry forward? I think a lot of this organic sharing of knowledge and what works during the pandemic should be used in more and more peer-to-peer learning. And again, it's L&D not as the font of wisdom, but L&D as the facilitator. How do I get that knowledge around? Little worksheet on that one, a few ideas. Actually, I got this from ATD. I think Kevin Oakes actually wrote it, show you the worksheet. Different ways that you can involve leaders, from storytelling to classrooms, and then how to help them prepare. And again, all these worksheets are in the book. More importantly, we'll have them available as a download. So that's all I wanted to cover. So I'm thinking about, it's early 2022. You're in front of your sharks. We want you to do well. And 3 things I encourage you to think about on your checklist of influence. From Carrie's point of view, spend your calendar time proactively building relationships. From Tamar's point of view, you're a performance consultant. You might be wearing a learning hat, but think performance, think priority. From David Vance, that notion about share to gain, governance councils, peer-to-peer learning. And I'm sure I missed a few things. So I'd be curious to see what you would add to your checklist. And I think what we're going to do next, Jay, is have people in breakout rooms just to carry on this conversation about the great L&D proposal you're going to come up with. What did you hear that's a good reminder that you're going to use for influence? What else have you found, what else have you found? And again, we'll post this later, but the book's got the worksheets. If you'd like the worksheets, I put them on my website. We'll have that available for a download. And my challenge to you as you go into that breakout is think about, what are the 2 things? What are the 2 little actions I'm going to build in to increase my odds of success next time I face the sharks? And with that, Mark and Jay, I'd love to turn it back to you to do a little breakout as the next part of this exercise. Great, well, welcome back. I think you're all pros at doing the Zoom chat thing. The one thing, or Zoom breakout, one thing we'd love to do is we segue from this to Gale's, is I'd love if people could go into chat for a second and just give us a couple words on what was that discussion about? What was kind of your insight or your reminder on gaining management influence? So again, if you could just pause for 1 second here, go to chat and just share with each other in a couple words, what was sort of the highlight of discussion on the chat, the breakout session on reminding ourselves about how to have influence to sell our L&D projects and ideas. Got a number of things coming through there. That's terrific. But again, invite everyone to kind of share what was kind of the reminder or the takeaway.
A lot of good stuff coming in. I did add to the chat a link that Kevin referenced to the downloads, and we'll also include that link in a follow-up thank you message to the session.
Nice. And again, I just shared a few things from the book, a few highlights from the interviews. There's a lot of collective wisdom out there on this topic. The final word I'm going to put here is, if you've got a great L&D initiative and you really want to sell it, have kind of a board of advisors. Inside the company is great, but I also think within this L&D community to use each other as sounding boards. And how do I really sell this well? So I'll leave you with that one last thought. And Mark and Jay, turn it back to you for Gale's presentation.
Okay, thank you so much, Karen. Mark, let's transition to Gale. And with that, I will hand it over to Gale Halsey.
All right, thanks so much. And Kevin, I took away a few things as well that I haven't heard. One thing Kevin and I were talking about in the breakout session is the fact that, we are not getting paid for this book. The impetus behind this book really was to share our collective, learning so that other people could learn from our failures, could learn from those who taught us. I will give Kevin so many kudos, because he was one. When I was first the CLO, I reached out to Kevin and some others, actually some of the writers in this book, and they gave me all these nuggets of wisdom, a very practical, tangible nuggets of wisdom. And so it's really cool that it's one book. So I wanted you to know why we keep plugging it, because it's not for us, it's actually for you. So I'm grateful to be here today. And just for a little bit of background about myself. So I am not currently a chief learning officer, but I was for 5 years for Ford Motor Company. I'm currently the head of HR for the Ford Credit Company. And I got to tell you, I take what I gleaned from that CLO job, and it has made me actually so much more powerful and so much better at people strategy. So I don't know, I think, and I'm grateful to my team. And so they're the ones who taught me how to be a chief learning officer, because I didn't grow up being one. In fact, I've been back and forth on the business side, the HR side, and of the business. And I was really grateful that I had award-winning teams. So here's some tips on how to think about building award-winning teams. And if we go to the next slide, if you think about when you start an organization, if you're a learning leader, you probably didn't get to work with a clean sheet of paper. And if you're an aspiring CLO, when you think about it, when you start leading your own organization, you're going to have one of two challenges. You're probably going to be growing a business, and part of a growing business, or you might be part of a shrinking business. And both business opportunities create amazing opportunities to build teams. But you have to do the assessment first of yourself and then your team. So if you go to the next slide, what Kevin did is he gave you a lot of really good tangible tools and resources. And in my chapter as well, I'm going to give you a lot of the key questions that you can ask as you go through an assessment. But a couple of them I'm going to highlight here. Dawn Raleigh is the co-founder of Bench Strength Coaching. She's an executive coach. And so I've asked her and some other people, like, what are great assessment questions for business leaders? What as an executive coach, coaches are great at asking questions. And so I asked her for advice for L&D leaders. And so you can see here what some of her questions are. And they're so in tune and aligned with what Kevin talked about as well. The only one I'd add is I like to ask the one about how do you like to learn? And what resources do you currently use to develop your skills? Because what you'll find is you'll find out what their preference is, but more than that, you may find out when you're facing a Shark Tank, how you're going to have to share, how you're going to have to sell them. And so that's, I think, a really important part of what Kevin was talking about as well, is really getting behind their motivation, what they're thinking, how they've experienced learning, how their kids might be experiencing learning. And all of that you can bring to the table when you have to do your Shark Tank influencing map. So in the next slide, though, so I mentioned that I came from a different background. And so this is a really controversial topic. So I thought I wanted to address this in my chapter. And so a lot of times it comes from, well, who should run the function? And so when I came into the organization, a lot of the CEOs were talking about, there are various folks who have been on the business side, that have been on the chief learning officer side. And so, I entered and I had, when I entered the organization at Ford, we had a leadership and professional development organization, but we also had learning leaders for each of the functions. So in a manufacturing company, it would be product development or marketing and sales. So we had a combination of instructional systems designers paired with engineers, in the case of PD, who were the functional technical experts. And so this question always came up in terms of, well, what is the right balance? How should this work? And then when do in fact, one learning leader had said, no, my business leader just told me I'm going to outsource it all other than myself. Well, I don't recommend that. Like, that is a no not never. You are never as a business going to have to give up your key asset when it comes to building capability. And especially that deep knowledge. That's what you can't get from outsourcing. But what you can get are great ideas. So when you bring in talent, outsourcing or sourcing of, like, think about Fredrickson, that can be really, I would say really, what's the word I want to use? Learning professionals, help me. It can be really a problem for those in the organization where they say, wait a minute, we're bringing people in and I can do this job. But what you do is that's how you can build capability. You augment it by bringing people in with skills and ability from the outside to your own team. And that's what I found that was what was really an effective strategy. And so I don't think it matters whether you're a business professional or an L&D professional. What you have to be is both. And so if you're a business professional starting an organization, you need to understand that there is an art and science and a very deep neuroscience. And if you're an L&D professional, you have to do everything Kevin just talked about in terms of learning the business. So that's why I just want to address this head on. There's no silver bullet. There's no one way to go, but you have to balance the needs of your business leader as well with the needs of the team. I had a team that was really, really steeped in ISD and learning strategies. So I could bring myself to the table. But if that's not the case, you've got to get your team out there talking to business leaders. And I'm not going to repeat that because Kevin just walked us through it, but I will add a couple things to it. So in the next slide, so I am going to talk about some of the skills and capabilities that I think are really essential for the future. And one of them is emerging. And so this notion of human-centered design or design thinking is one I'm going to touch on briefly. I'm going to talk about agile learning and development. I think probably folks on this call are very skilled at it, but I'm going to put a plug in because it's still really an important learning facilitation technique out there and a content development technique. And then I'm going to talk about why understanding big and small technologies, when to use them and when to buy them, is really important. And that's capability. That's actually an experience capability and a capability that every learning professional needs to, especially learning leaders, need to undertake. So with that, I'm going to turn to human-centered design. And if I were in a room with everybody, I'd ask you to raise your hand, how many people have heard about human-centered design or design thinking? So if you have and you know what it is, can you put it in the chat so I don't spend too much time on it? Beautiful. Oh, this makes me so happy. Okay, so a couple no's, but my God, yeses. All right, so I won't spend a lot of time talking about it, but I will say that in this area, if we're not practicing, if we're not really getting the human element of a process or a learning solution, we fail. And we know that. And you know, the interesting thing is this is being taught by the businesses as well. So I won't spend a lot of time on this. If you want to deep dive for more examples, you can go into the book, again, the shameless plug. But you can also go online. There's so many resources out there. The next one, how many agree? Oh, no, before we go, the failure of the CLO. This is me. Well, it's a much younger, cuter me. But this is how I felt when I didn't practice human-centered design. So I'm going to tell you a story where I cost the company millions of dollars. And really, it was around when I was implementing a learning management system. And, you know, we did focus groups and with employees, and I listened to the vendors, and the vendors were saying, you know, you've got to implement this big learning management system. And you know what? It's even got things like stars. That's what people really care about. And I thought the problem we were trying to solve and the pain point was really having this beautiful site where people could go and they can click on stars that they liked it, and they could have easy access to learning solutions. And because I didn't sit down, I didn't practice human-centered design thinking, we implemented that system. And after the period of the first month of marketing campaigns, and when you get a little tick up and then the usage went down, and we did another mark and a little bit of a tick and it went down. And so we realized that marketing wasn't the answer. So I finally sat down I went and I talked to some employees, and I sat down with them side by side and I practiced human design thinking. And I said, how do you find learning? And basically they were just typing into their search engine, right? And so they had a search engine at their point of work, and that was a search engine that they would type into. Well, guess what? Most learning management systems are not tied to their internet system. So they would just get frustrated and the search wasn't working. And in fact, the search wasn't very good in the system that I implemented at the time. And then I asked supervisors, I said, well, how do you tell your employees how to develop learning solutions? And they would say, well, we just type into Google. So I could have spent $30,000 just on internal learning system, guiding people to curated content instead of spending millions of dollars. The problem they wanted to solve is to easily find information. That is a failure of not practicing human systems design. So I leave you with that. The stars are great in the management systems. They don't care because most of it's compliance training anyway. All right, let's go to the next slide. Agile learning methods. So I'm going to do a test here for time. So how many folks know agile learning methods? Give it a minute. Any no's? Yep. All right. I will not spend a lot of time on this then. Agile learning methods, got to do it. And I will tell you the time, what Kevin talked about the clients, what we talked about in terms of becoming irrelevant, if you are not practicing agile methods of content development and you are not getting content out fast enough, you will be irrelevant. So it's not just about pitching to the executive about the business case. It is absolutely about the time it takes to development. So continue to practice, get those short-term wins, get those MVPs out there, co-develop with your clients, practice the human-centered design. They're linked together and get it out quickly. That's the fastest way. If you take 2 years or a year even now, our businesses are going so fast that, I would honestly say if you can't develop content in 4 weeks, you're irrelevant. And capability building as an HR professional right now, the reason learning is so important to me is I can't find people off the street. So I need learning solutions today, especially technical ones. L&D has never been more important. Let's go to the next slide. All right, I told you about a big failure around technology. But the capabilities, we can't just rely on the technical vendors to help us. And as we all know, my 6-year-old niece can develop a production online on my niece and nephew who are twins. They on their phone right now can put their face on a video and create content. So that's the world we know. So the world we know, how do we as L&D professionals, what's the best way? Because the technology keeps evolving. I keep saying, pretty soon somebody's going to tell me how to do a hologram. My niece and nephew are going to tell me, here, push the button here, Aunt Gale, for a hologram, right? So it's evolving too quickly. So how do you keep up with that? One of the members of my team, his name is Jonathan Casterline. Jonathan came to me and he developed a community and it was called Techie Talks, and it's in the book. But I'm so proud of Jonathan because he took it upon himself and he was really a good. He was absolutely, he will appreciate me. See, he was a tech geek. But everybody went to Jonathan to learn the small technologies, right? The ones that are even more relevant so you could get that content out. And so this small community of practice, it's an old concept, but it works. It always works. And so what he did is every month, the L&D folks on the team would come together and Jonathan and others would teach each other what they've learned from a technology standpoint. And if you can continue those kind of learning circles in your L&D organization, you win. All right, so next slide, please. All right, and this is, it's the cobbler's children, right? This is so important to learning leaders. And in fact, Kevin and I, during the breakout, were sharing some strategies. We both have used different strategies. And in fact, one that is being used right now from a woman, my CLO of Ford Credit, is a book club. And I was just telling Kevin that she's using this book and has even developed questions around this book for her book club. But things like book clubs or or conferences or this virtual. I mean, there's no excuse now not to be continually learning. This podcast in itself is a brilliant way to increase. So encourage your teams, make it an expectation, encourage your teams to come. And then, Kevin and I were talking about a strategy my team came up with is learning and then presenting to each other. It's an old concept, but my team used to have so fun. We'd read a book and they would present out. And I mean, we had sock puppets and instruments, and it just made it fun, right? So you can create that cohesion of the team and have fun and build capability, but make it a priority because everybody is so busy these days. And that's really, so one more, when to buy skills. So we talked about internal development, but it is absolutely essential to bring in people who have new skills. At Ford, we've had a long history of people who have stayed. I've been with the company 26 years. Most people have been here a long time. Bringing in outside talent is also another way to build internal talent. And so when you need to buy talent on the outside, when you do it, you do it if you can't go fast enough to be relevant. You do it when, especially for technology or different ideas, you do it. Look at Fredrickson's learning, right? And what they offer. You do it when you want to augment the skills. It's a great way to build capability in the organization. So with that, I think, am I at my last slide? Yeah. All right. So one of the things that people mentioned in the chat was they wanted to learn about award-winning organizations. I will say, I talked to Rob Laubert. He was a CLO of McDonald's. And when I first got in the job, I attended a conference with him and there were awards. And he's like, I used to think this was the stupidest political thing in the world. Like, he's like, but he's like, what I've learned is looking at the criteria for awards is really important, because if you look at that criteria for those awards, it tells you there are so many good practices in there, and it's all about business impact. So they will absolutely, those are great guideposts. And I love to bring my team to conferences, virtual conferences like that, where you can attend it together and then come up with ideas after. That's how you develop award-winning teams. Do it together, study what good is out there, attend conferences, do virtual learning, and make it a priority. That's what award-winning teams are. And I think with that, this Fredrickson Learning needs to take a bow, because they brought us an opportunity to help us learn and to talk to you. So with that, I think we're going to a break.
So I do want to bring us back to our outcomes from our small groups. Please start chatting some of your key takeaways from what Gale shared with us. Maybe I shouldn't have cut people off. Everyone was very interested in listening to Gale and Kevin talk about what they were sharing with each other.
We're expanding the conversation here, but yeah, I had a chance at the break, I had a chance to look at all the chats from my session, and they were great. And clearly, what you talked about in the breakouts were great. One person mentioned that in the breakout, they helped that person develop their influence strategy.
Oh,
that was great. But again, yeah, put into chat from this last piece.
Yeah, we were just talking about ethnography, and ethnography is just the study of people, and how oftentimes when you just go out, well, first of all, leaders really don't know what employees want. Okay, so there's that. You still got to sell them, but they don't know. Number two, focus groups don't always bring out, like even the focus groups we did with that learning management system that failed, people say, oh, that's great. But what they really wanted, just the observation of how they find content, what are their pain points, watching them, going to employees and sitting down with them, or going to, whomever your customer is a really good practice.
Okay, so as people are starting to share some of their chats, I'm going to transition to the idea of, if you'd like to chat or be thinking of questions for Kevin or Gale, And I want to open things up for questions. We've got about 20 minutes less. And so let's start. I see a question from Dave Lasecki, and since he's my boss, his question goes first. That's how life works, in case people don't know. Dave has a question for Gale. You mentioned having your team study award presentations and learn from the criteria. Do you have one or two award contests that come to mind, and any criteria from the awards that your team learned from? Great question, Dave.
Well, I'll tell you where I succeeded and failed on that. We were just talking about that in the break. We would look at the criteria, but our mistake, we didn't really spend time applying. And what Kevin reminded me, so we were just so heads down. We were building the team, resources flow, all the bad excuses out there. But you know what Kevin did, and I'm going to turn it back to Kevin, because Kevin reminded me the brand is so important, right? It's good recognition for the team as well. And so we used it as a tool to improve, but there's other aspects that are really important about applying and taking the time to apply. Kevin, you want to talk about that?
I just would mention that, back when I was a CLO, I selectively used one or two award programs to do two things. Number one, to reflect the great work that's going on in L&D, so that when we hit a list, we let people inside the company know, but it just said, hey, so it's recognition for learning and development. And the second part is that it raised the bar. Hey, we're going after this award, and are you doing this? I'll also mention that now in my role where I'm advising companies and things, that I get pulled in to be a judge. And this past year, I just did one a month or two ago, and there was an application that was amazing. I mean, it was fresh, it was innovative, it was so cool. And I'm reading it, and I'm reading the pages, and I'm waiting for one thing, which is, okay, did that matter to the business? And there was no business story. And I was just heartbroken. It was, and maybe they did it, but it was all about L&D excellence. Now we need L&D excellence. We need fresh ideas of innovation, but it didn't connect with, did it matter to the business? So I think the other thing that these award programs remind us of is, yeah, can you really tell a story that shows impact?
Jay, you're muted.
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin and Gale. That was a wonderful answer on the awards. Does someone have a question for Kevin? If no one has a question right now for Kevin, I'll start. Kevin, what's your scariest memory of the Shark Tank?
See, I'm retired from corporate life. I don't have to live that again. But yeah. What I'll tell you this. I'll flip it around. What's really exciting, when I'm hearing Gale's presentation, is all the things like, man, I had to learn that the hard way. Human-centered design. Understanding pain points. There was one program where I was asked, "Gee, we're a little slow in decision making. Give us some decision making speed training." And that I didn't do any root cause. I didn't do any human-centered design, and came up with really a world-class speed and decision-making program, and infected the top 2,000 leaders of the organization with this training, which had nothing to do with the root cause problem. And I survived it, but it's like, man, I was just after the wrong thing. So again, back to the, my earlier comment about, we know a lot, but we forget, is having a checklist, having a trusted advisor. I mean, those are all the things that, when I did it right, helped me. And when I did it wrong and, suffered my own pain points, it's like, I forgot about that. I forgot about test and learn. I forgot about get at the real issues, forgot about, handle the priorities, not what people like. Gale, what do you think?
I'm going to throw in one. I totally agree with that. And you just reminded me of another complete failing. So I was trying to sell competencies to the top leadership team at Ford. This is years ago. And it was a new thing for Ford. And so having like competencies and being and assessing them, this was a big change management effort. And I bet some of you have had that where you're going to go in and do a presentation and you think it's going to be 20 minutes. And it's like, suddenly you're like, you've got 10 minutes to tell your story. Okay. This is before Shark Tank came out or before I had Kevin in my life. And I froze, like I absolutely froze. I didn't have the essence of like the elevator speech for what I needed to get crossed in the 10 minutes. And so that's another thing. You have to have this really crisp, you've got to be, and even my body language is like, ugh. So, you just have to have confidence, walking in, if anybody's seen Amy Cuddy, you raise your hands just to, in front of the mirror, you do whatever, deep breathing, whatever you need to before you go into the room. But I think as L&D professionals, sometimes we feel like we're not valuable or, oh gosh, our voice isn't important. And we are valuable. We are so valuable to the organization and what we say matters. And so have confidence when you walk in, have your elevator speech ready, raise your arms, do whatever it does for your body language to look like you're confident and you know what you're talking about. And if nothing else, they may not remember what you said, but they will remember how you made them feel. And if they feel really excited about that idea, you're halfway there.
Gail, that's great. If I get one other comment, and I think about the first couple of times I had to walk into the CEO and senior leaders and, didn't have the elevator speech, didn't have the savvy. And the one thing that I learned over time is most decision makers assume you've got lots of good things, right? Lots of upside to what you're proposing, but they're sitting in a room and they're hearing proposal after proposal from marketing, sales, and all this, and now it's your turn. What they're looking for is risk and risk mitigation.
That's right.
And I had to learn that the hard way, that, you show them a little bit, yeah, you've done your homework, show them a little bit about, hey, there's a lot of great benefits and this contributes to the business, but they're going to ask questions about what could go wrong. And I think the notion about, if you're going to be in the Shark Tank, start thinking like a shark. And I think sharks think about risk. And have you thought about what could go wrong? And I've at a couple times at the end of my career, I'd say, by the way, here's a great idea. I think we should do it because of this, blah, blah, blah. And by the way, we started thinking about what the risks are, and this could go wrong, that could go wrong. And here's how we're going to avoid it or mitigate it, and just put it out there.
Love it. What other questions?
I've got one. I was looking at some of the chats. I'd love to ask Lynn. I think it's Kissock. The comment is, you have all of your trainers shadow their end user audience for a year. I'd love to hear, Lynn, if you're on the call, to kind of tell us more about what do you mean by shadowing and how does that exactly work? I think that's very intriguing.
Hi, this is Lynn Kissick. My current role, I'm the manager of IS Education for Centricare Health, which is an 8-hospital system in central Minnesota. My trainers, my team, are responsible for training all of our electronic medical record. And the reason I have our team shadow the end users is because our team is very connected to our technical team who's building the software, building the solutions, and they can get very disconnected from the audience that they're training. And it's that once a year reminder to anchor yourself in the who, the why, and how they need to receive that message, rather than getting lost in the tech and the tech speak and the reason coming from IS. So that was the reason for that comment.
That's great. Thank you.
Yep.
Maria asked the question to both of you, and Maria, you may need to clarify a little bit for us, but what do you do each day to get back in that frame of mind? And I'm not exactly sure what you mean by back in what frame of mind. Those things Kevin mentioned, I forgot to. So Gale, maybe you can answer Maria's next question. Just how do you start your day as a learning professional?
Well, it used to be, I mean, in my case, most days we're starting with business meetings and or HR meetings. And so if I'm truthful, that's, and especially in a global company, 6, 7 a.m., that's what we're starting with. And it was really important for me to make sure that I was very connected to the HR organization as well, because L&D is one arm of an entire talent and people strategy process. And so that's, it's not just about asking business leaders what they want, but when you think about talent within the organization and how people are being developed, and making sure you're connected to that talent system is really important. And then, to be honest, I do, we do in my team now, it's not the L&D team, but we have what I call Freaky Fridays. I used to call them Frankenstein Fridays, but because Frankenstein was the biggest failure and yet not, right? And so it was designed as a day where you could take time and you could spend time learning. And so, for those who prioritize that learning time and development time for themselves, that's what that was intended to do. And so, and I do take time out. I listen to podcasts. It's a little bit different today than day. I listen to podcasts. I listen to little snippets of information to make sure. And it's normally at the end of my day, if I'm honest. But I make sure that I am trying to spend some time learning articles, research. Kevin's going to send me another one. That's how I stay current.
Thank you, Gale. That is great. Kevin, I wanted to ask you. You had talked about one of the things that you were saying and gave examples of was building relationships with your stakeholders. Is there any aha that you developed by through those relationships, or any stakeholder that kind of surprised you how important they were after the fact, that maybe going in you didn't expect them to be that important?
I think just the question itself is back to where do you start your day? I'll link to that. Is there a stakeholder I can learn from today or connect with? And just, the way that I typically start my day is like, okay, how many minutes can I avoid email first? And then what I want to get done for the day. And I've become a big fan of blocking time out for things. But beyond that, what's your learning question? What's the, learning as in, here's what I'm working on. And it could be, confidence. When I'm spending time with senior leaders, or when I'm, reaching out to someone that I normally don't spend time with. I'll give you a funny transaction. So at one point in my career, really cool thing happened. The company doubled in size. General Mills acquired Pillsbury. We're bigger. I inherited a learning team. We got lots going on internationally. And I remember my manager saying, okay, what do you want to be called? Because there was a little nice promotion with that. And at the time, Chief Learning Officer was not well known. And I said, I want to be titled Chief Learning Officer. And he said, what does that mean? And my answer was, exactly. Nobody knows what that means. And so I started going to meetings and meeting with people that a training manager wouldn't do, but the CLO would do. So if you will, I crafted my own job. And I think that might be the mindset, is how do I craft in 2022? There's going to be a lot of strange things going on. There's going to be a lot of, hangover from 2021. There's going to be lots of new opportunities. But I think the challenge is, how do you craft your job in 2022 to bring in, your skills at your best, to, build a great L&D team, to be influential. But, what would your title be, that if 2022 was the best year in your career, what would that be? And then I think that's how you start your day, is how close can I get to that definition intentionally of, how I want to act and how I want to show up and how others can see me. That's got stretch. Gale, that seems to resonate. You're kind of nodding your head a bit. Anything you'd add?
100%. And in fact, if we don't do that, we just get caught up. I love the fact you're trying to avoid email. That's the trap. That's my trap. Because we have so many, we call it we have a lot of meetings. And so we need to make sure that you're focusing on the big things, the big 3 priorities. Even for learning teams, if you're working on 12 things, you're probably going to fail. You've got pick 4, do it really, really well. And I like the magic number 3. I saw that there was one other question that came up in the chat.
I was chuckling because now I've got like 3 or 4 questions for you now that we're getting closer to the end. So I'm going to put a bunch of questions out there. I'm going to let each of you choose. Which chapters in your book, in the book Forward Focused Learning, did you find most helpful? You both mentioned failures, and is there a failure that you learned the most from? And then another favorite of mine is any books that either of you have read recently that you'd recommend. So Gale, you want to pick one and then we'll pass it on to Kevin?
Well, I talked a lot about failures, so I got to end on a positive. It's interesting. I think if you asked me, I was always afraid somebody would ask me this question, like, what's the last book you read? And it probably was Uncle John's Bathroom Reader, because that's exactly what I have next to my bed. Okay, it's great. I highly recommend it. Great little stories and tidbits in 3 pages. But with that being said, the human brain, there's a podcast out there that I really love, and it's called The Human Brain. It's on NPR. And This American Life. And what I actually like to listen to things that have nothing to do with my job, where I'm just learning, so that you're making the connections back. So as much as we love the future, really, this is a great book, I think we also need to expand our minds and read things that are totally unrelated. And I think that helps the creative process. And so that's what I would recommend. But there's some great NPR podcasts out there that I think are fascinating. Oh, Jay, are you on mute? I'm sorry.
Jay's trying not to get any background noise, and he keeps going on mute. Kevin, any of those 3 questions tickle your fancy that we sent over to Gale?
Well, I'd say that in the book itself, we'd say all good, jump into a chapter. I particularly enjoyed the introduction because it was an overview of all the authors. And one thing you do when you're doing one of these books that you're just doing a chapter is you don't get to talk to the other authors. And that just gave me a great sense of, okay, here's what's current, here's what's going on, and the integration of that. So I think the introduction, best book I've read in the last 5 years is Cal Newport's Deep Work. He's got a few others out. And, his premise is we're getting so distracted, we're losing the ability to focus. And, we may get high marks for being responsive, but we're scattered. And he said, if you really want to make a big contribution, you've got to have the discipline to block out time to do important things and relearn that skill of focus. And I have to admit that I have to work on that from time to time. But that book really resonated with me, and I continue to live that one. But love it all. Yeah.
One more that's really correlation to that. David Rock, Your Brain at Work. And it's neuroscience, especially relevant to the L&D community. It's how you maintain focus. There's no more than 7 actors in your brain on a stage. So I would highly recommend that book personally, but it also has a great relevance to the L&D community. You just may remember that, Kevin.
Cool.
Okay. Well, with that, I want to help us wrap up and conclude. And I want to start by urging people to chat or go to their reactions and do their clap or their thumbs up, or but let's do a thank you to Gale and to Kevin. Very much appreciate you taking your time for the session today, and I think I could listen to both of you for a couple of hours and be pretty entertained and learn a lot.